Welcome back, friends. I'm back with another amazing story. In this episode, we'll hear the incredible story of William and Isabella. If you're ready, let's begin. Enjoy watching. "If you kiss me, our worlds will make peace, human," said the alien queen. So I kissed the alien queen. The war had not ended with a battle. Wars like this one rarely did. It had simply continued, season after season, communique after communique, until the word war itself had lost its urgency and become something closer to weather. People checked the conflict updates the way they checked atmospheric reports. With resignation, with routine, with the quiet understanding that nothing they did on a Tuesday morning would change what was coming by Thursday. William had been assigned to the Valori negotiation file on a Tuesday morning. He found out via an automated message flagged as low priority, wedged between a reminder about his expired cafeteria credits and a departmental notice about the new protocol for requisitioning intersector transit vouchers. The message read in its entirety: Diplomat W. Hartley reassigned Sereth Border Station Valori Accord track departure in 72 hours. Accommodation confirmed. Translation unit provided. Good luck. The good luck was new. William had never received an official communication that ended with good luck before. He sat with that for a while. He was not the first choice. He understood this without needing to be told. The way a person understands they have been seated at the secondary table at a wedding, not from cruelty, but from a quiet and practical mathematics. Ambassador Logan had resigned in the third month of talks, citing what his formal letter called irreconcilable differences in foundational cosmological values, and what his informal letter, sent only to William, called, "They told me the concept of borders was a form of psychological illness, and honestly I'm starting to agree with them." After Logan came Thomas, who lasted 6 weeks before a stress-induced inner ear condition rendered him temporarily unable to distinguish up from down. A condition his physician noted was either stress-induced or caused by the Valori delegation's harmonic communication frequencies, and which was, either way, incompatible with continued service. After Thomas, there had been others. William had stopped counting after the 5th. He packed one bag. He had learned in 14 years of diplomatic postings that a person who packed one bag was either very experienced or had run out of things worth bringing. He was, at this point, both. The transit vessel to Sereth was a mid-class diplomatic courier that smelled faintly of recycled oxygen and someone else's anxiety. William found his assigned corridor, stowed his bag, and was immediately approached by his assigned translation unit, a DF-7 drone, roughly the size of a melon, which hovered at shoulder height and introduced itself in a voice calibrated to project calm. "Good evening, diplomat," it said. "I am your designated translation and cultural liaison unit. I have been preloaded with all 42 recognized Valori dialects, current diplomatic terminology, and at the request of the Wellness Division, 300 ambient relaxation phrases. May I offer you something to eat?" "No," said William. "I recommend the nutrient broth," said the drone. In Valori, nutrient broth translates loosely to that which the body accepts when the spirit has given up. "I thought you might find it appropriate." William looked at the drone for a long moment. "What is your error rate?" he asked. "Negligible," said the drone, and offered him soup. Sereth did not announce itself. There was no dramatic emergence from transit fog, no sweeping planetary vista rendered in the viewscreen above his bunk. There was only a slight deceleration, a soft chime, and then the drone hovering beside his head saying, "We have arrived." In Valori, the word for arrival translates most accurately as the moment before regret becomes useful. William had been asleep. He was no longer asleep. The border planet received them with the particular indifference of a place that had hosted too many important moments to be impressed by any single one. Sereth belonged to neither humans nor Valori. It predated both, technically, having been catalogued by a third civilization whose name appeared in the historical record only as a series of geometric symbols, and who had, by all available evidence, simply decided to leave the galaxy one afternoon and not come back. What they had left behind, aside from an atmospheric processor that still functioned without any known power source, was the amphitheater. William saw it from the transit platform before he saw anything else, and he stopped walking without meaning to. It had been carved directly into the mountain, not built against it, not constructed at its base, but taken from it, shaped inward, as though whoever made it had understood that the mountain itself was the architecture and everything else was merely negative space. The stone was pale, almost white, and in the early Sereth morning the light moved across it in a way that made it appear to breathe. 17,000 seats rose in concentric arcs from a circular floor below. The acoustics, William had read in his briefing, were such that a whisper from the center of that floor could be heard in every seat without amplification. He was not sure if he found that impressive or deeply alarming. "Magnificent, isn't it?" said the drone, appearing at his shoulder. "Yes," said William. "The Velori delegation arrived 4 hours ago," the drone continued. "They have already reviewed the agenda, submitted 14 amendments, rejected 11 of their own amendments, and requested that the central negotiating table be moved 40 centimeters to the east to better align with what they describe as the planet's spiritual axis." "Did we move it?" "We moved it 38 centimeters and told them it was 40. No one has mentioned it." William picked up his bag and walked. The interior hall where the preliminary sessions would be held was a long, vaulted room adjacent to the amphitheater's eastern entrance. Its walls lined with the same pale stone and fitted with modern equipment that looked faintly embarrassed to be there. Holographic display arrays and signal dampeners and climate regulators, all installed with the careful discretion of technology that knew it did not belong. William noted the long ceremonial table, now presumably on its spiritual axis, and the chairs arranged on either side with rigid symmetry, and the small flags of 2 civilizations placed at exact equal distance from the center. And he thought, not for the first time, that diplomacy had a gift for making peace look like a courtroom. She was already there. He had been given a file. He had read the file. He had read it twice, in fact, once on the transit vessel and once in the pre-dawn hour when sleep had failed him. He knew from the file what to expect. He had thought he was prepared. She was seated at the far end of the table, reviewing something on a document slate, and she did not look up when he entered. Her scarlet skin held the light of the room differently than anything else in it, not absorbing it, not reflecting it, but doing something for which William did not immediately have a word. Her silver hair was pulled back with an efficiency that suggested she had more important things to think about than her silver hair. Her ears, long, tapered, angled slightly upward and back, shifted almost imperceptibly at the sound of his footsteps, the way a precise instrument responds to a signal it has already measured and categorized. She said without looking up, "You are 11 minutes late. I have already noted it." William set his bag down. "I stopped to look at the amphitheater." "I know," she said. "Everyone does." She turned a page. "It does not make you less late." The drone, hovering loyally at William's shoulder, chose this moment to announce in a bright and helpful tone that it could offer refreshments in 6 languages. Neither of them responded. The drone offered soup anyway. The first session began at 9th hour and ended at 9th hour and 43 minutes, which was a record, though not the kind anyone wanted to hold. The issue, as it turned out, was the agenda itself. Specifically, Item 1 of the agenda, which was the approval of the agenda, which the Velori delegation declined to approve on the grounds that an agenda implied a predetermined conclusion, and a predetermined conclusion implied that the Velori position had already been weighed and found insufficient, which was not a neutral starting point, but an act of philosophical aggression. William had listened to this argument for 43 minutes. He had not interrupted. He had learned, across 14 years and more collapsed negotiations than he cared to count, that the first thing a diplomat surrendered was the instinct to respond. He wrote one word in his notes, Tuesday. The second session lasted longer and accomplished less, which he had also learned was possible. A junior member of the Valori delegation, young, precise, radiating the particular energy of someone who had rehearsed, produced a holographic star map to illustrate the ancestral territorial claims of the Valori people across 11 contested sectors. The map was impressively detailed and obviously the result of considerable labor, and it glitched 11 minutes into the presentation, replacing the outer contested sectors with what appeared to be a Valori breakfast menu. The junior delegate, to his considerable credit, did not break. He continued presenting, gesturing at items that now read as spiced grain porridge and twice-fermented morning drink, with the same gravity he had applied to disputed star systems. William kept his expression neutral. Across the table, he noticed Isabella set her document slate down very carefully, which he was beginning to understand was what she did instead of reacting. By the fourth session, they had agreed on two things. The planet Sarath would be referred to in all documentation as a neutral site, and both delegations would be provided with water at room temperature rather than chilled, because the Valori considered chilled water an expression of hostility. William had accepted this without comment. He was not going to spend political capital on water temperature. He was going to need that capital for something that mattered, assuming they ever reached something that mattered. The days arranged themselves into a pattern. Morning sessions in the vaulted hall, afternoon sessions in the vaulted hall, evenings in the vaulted hall staring at the same pale stone walls, while his drone offered him progressively more exotic refreshments, and he declined all of them. The human support staff ate in shifts in a side room and spoke in the low voices of people who had stopped expecting good news. The Valori delegation retired each evening through a separate corridor, their movements precise and unhurried, their long ears catching every sound the building made as they passed through it. He did not intend to find himself at the overlook. The first evening, it was simply the nearest exit that did not lead back to the hall, and he needed air that had not been breathed by 17 diplomats already. He stood at the stone railing above the amphitheater and watched the Sarath night come in across the mountains, blue dark and enormous, and the atmospheric processor somewhere below them hummed in a frequency that was not quite sound and not quite silence but somewhere between the two, as though the planet itself were thinking. She was there the second evening before he was. She did not acknowledge him when he arrived, and he did not announce himself. He stood at the railing a careful distance from where she stood at the railing, and they both looked at the amphitheater below, pale and still in the dark, holding its 17,000 empty seats with the patience of something that had been waiting a long time and had grown comfortable with waiting. The morning session was unproductive, William said eventually. Yes, said Isabella. The afternoon session was also unproductive. Yes. A long silence followed, during which the atmospheric processor continued its almost sound, and somewhere behind them the drone located William by signal and arrived to inform him that it could offer, in the Valori tradition, a warm beverage described as that which is drunk when words have proven insufficient. William looked at Isabella. That one, he said, might actually be appropriate. For one brief moment, so brief he was not certain it had happened, something shifted at the corner of her expression. Not a smile. Something that existed in the space just before a smile and then was gone. She turned and walked back inside. He stayed at the railing a while longer, and the night stayed with him, and neither of them said anything else, and somehow that was the most progress the day had made. It was a document of 41 pages that ended everything, which was appropriate, because it had taken 41 days to get to the point where everything could be ended by a document. William heard about it at 6th hour, before the morning session, before coffee, which was its own particular cruelty. His aide, a young man named Carter who had the permanent expression of someone reading bad news for the second time, appeared at his door holding a tablet with the careful two-handed grip of a person delivering something fragile or dangerous, and said simply, "It leaked." William did not ask what. He took the tablet. The document was an internal human diplomatic assessment, authored 8 months prior by the Office of the Senior Strategic Council, and it described the Valori civilization in terms that were, William read slowly, carefully, the way a person reads something they are hoping will improve, thorough, detailed, and catastrophic. It referred to Valori territorial philosophy as a neurological artifact of a pre-rational culture. It described their harmonic communication frequencies as acoustically aggressive and probably deliberate. There was a paragraph on page 19 that William read 3 times, each time hoping it would mean something different, and each time it meant exactly the same thing it had meant the first time. He set the tablet down. "How wide?" he asked. "Every major Valori news network," Carter said. "It's been translated into all 42 dialects. Someone, we don't know who, added annotations." "Annotations?" "Helpful ones," Carter said, in a tone that made clear they were not helpful. "For context, the morning session did not happen. In its place, there was a silence of the administrative kind, the kind that fills corridors and meeting rooms and communication channels all at once, a silence made not of absence, but of people deciding very carefully what not to say. 3 senior human diplomats were recalled before noon. William watched their transit requests process through the station system from his desk and thought about the particular efficiency of institutions abandoning things, how quickly the paperwork moved when the decision had already been made somewhere above him. The Valori Outer Council transmitted their ultimatum at 14th hour. It was 7 sentences long, which in Valori diplomatic tradition indicated maximum severity. Anything shorter was a formality. Anything longer left room for interpretation. 7 sentences left no room for anything. The drone translated it in full, then added, unprompted, that in ancient Valori the number 7 represented the last door before the house is left behind, and then offered William a snack, and William put his head in his hands. Outside, on the slopes of Sarath, the gathered thousands had changed in character over the past days in a way that was difficult to name but impossible to miss. They had come, journalists and refugees and witnesses, and the simply curious, carrying something that was not quite hope, but lived in hope's approximate neighborhood. Now that quality had shifted. William could see them from his window, the way they stood in their groups, the way the murmur of the crowd had dropped in register, the way people stand when they are preparing themselves for a confirmation rather than a surprise. He went to the amphitheater that night because there was nowhere else that felt proportionate to what he was thinking. The hall was too small. His room was too small. Only the open stone of the amphitheater, with its 17,000 empty seats curving up into the dark, felt like the right size for the specific weight he was carrying. He sat on the floor of the central circle, the exact center, where a whisper could reach every seat, and said nothing, because there was no one to whisper to, and because the things he might have said didn't feel like whispers anyway. The drone found him within minutes, because the drone always found him, and hovered at a respectful distance before announcing that it had been cross-referencing Valori culinary terminology for emotional states, and believed the current situation corresponded most closely to a dish called *Verath Salyun, a preparation described as that which is made from what remains after the good ingredients are gone. "Is it edible?" William asked. "Technically," said the drone. "That's something," said William. He did not hear Isabella arrive. He became aware of her the way he had become aware of her each evening at the Overlook, not by sound or signal but by some shift in the quality of the air, as though the space arranged itself differently when she was in it. He did not turn around. She did not speak. She stood at the edge of the central circle for a long moment, and then she sat not beside him, but near enough that the distance was a choice rather than an accident. They sat in the amphitheater in the dark, and above them the Sarath night was enormous and indifferent, and somewhere in it, two civilizations were calculating the cost of what came next, and neither William nor Isabella said a single word, and it was the most honest conversation the negotiation had produced. The final session was called for the third day after the leak, which gave everyone exactly enough time to understand that it was final. No one announced it as such. The official communication used the phrase comprehensive concluding assembly, which was the diplomatic equivalent of writing surprise on the outside of a box, but the gathered thousands on the slopes of Sarath understood, and the delegations understood, and the journalists repositioned their recording equipment to angles that anticipated history rather than process. William dressed with the particular care of a person who knows the clothes will be remembered, and finds that faintly absurd. Carter appeared at his door with a pressed diplomatic jacket and the expression of someone attending a funeral they had been asked to cater, and said nothing, which was the most useful thing Carter had done all week. The amphitheater received them the way it received everything, without preference, without ceremony, with only its pale stone and its ancient acoustics, and its 17,000 seats filling from the outer edges inward as the morning light moved across the mountain in slow, indifferent increments. William took his position at the floor of the central circle. The Velori delegation arranged themselves on the far side with the composed precision of people who had made their peace with the day's outcome. The human delegation stood behind William in a formation that felt, to him, less like support and more like witnesses. The speeches came first because they always did. A senior Velori delegate spoke for 20 minutes in harmonic frequencies that the drone translated with admirable speed and increasingly strained neutrality. Ancestral claims, broken frameworks, the philosophical violence of borders, the cultural weight of what had been written in that document of 41 pages. A human representative responded with 19 minutes of careful language that managed to apologize for everything while technically admitting nothing, which was its own kind of art form. The crowd listened. The crowd had stopped believing sometime in the previous days, and that disbelief had a texture now, not hostile, not grieving, but something flatter and more permanent, the texture of people who have revised their expectations down to the level of the floor and found to their exhaustion that the floor keeps moving. William said nothing during any of this. He had no speech prepared. He had started one 3 times and deleted it 3 times, because every version of it was built from the same material as everything that had already failed: careful language, managed distance, the precise and bloodless architecture of institutional hope. He stood at the center of the circle and listened and understood, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that he had nothing left to offer in that register. The silence came gradually, the way silences do in large spaces, not all at once but in sections, spreading outward from some invisible point until it had reached every seat and every slope and every person standing on them. William became aware of it the way you become aware of a sound stopping, first as absence, then as presence, then as something that had weight and direction. She came down from the high platform without announcement. He had watched her in sessions for weeks, her stillness, her precision, the way she moved through formal space as though she had already calculated every step before taking it. This was different. This was not ceremony. She descended the pale steps of the platform, the way a person descends when the decision is already made, and the only remaining act is the walking. Her silver hair lifted in the wind that moved through the amphitheater in slow currents, and her scarlet skin held the morning light, and her long ears were angled forward with an attention so complete it felt almost like sound itself. The crowd did not react. They simply watched, the way people watch when they sense that reacting would interrupt something necessary. She crossed the floor of the central circle and stopped before him at a distance that was neither formal nor informal but something that had no protocol name, and she looked at him with the same directness she had brought to everything, to document slates and morning sessions and evenings at the Overlook, and she spoke her condition. Not loudly. The amphitheater carried it anyway. William heard it reach the upper seats and come back to him. His own stillness returned in echo, and he understood that she had not issued a condition at all. She had simply said, in the fewest possible words, what she had apparently concluded some time ago, and had been waiting, with characteristic patience, for the situation to require her to say aloud. The drone, hovering faithfully at the perimeter, began to formulate a translation, then apparently thought better of it. For the first time in William's experience, it said nothing. Even the wind seemed to wait. He raised his hand slowly, the way you move in a space where sudden gestures might mean the wrong thing, and he touched her face, the line of her jaw, just below the angle where her long ear curved downward toward her cheek, with the careful, uncertain pressure of a person touching something they are not sure is real. Her skin was warmer than he had expected. He did not know what he had expected. He had not, until approximately 40 seconds ago, expected any of this. She did not flinch. She did not close her eyes. She watched him with the same precise attention she brought to everything. And he understood, in the way you understand things that arrive without warning and without instruction, that this was simply how she received the world, directly, completely, without the cushioning distance that most people kept between themselves and what was happening to them. It was not a long kiss. It was not a theatrical one. It was the kind that exists at the exact boundary between gesture and meaning, and when it was over, William did not step back immediately, and neither did she, and for a moment they remained at that boundary together, close enough that he could see the faint silver lines at her temples that he had never been near enough to notice before. Then she held his gaze and he held hers, and the word that came to him, unbidden, slightly embarrassing, entirely accurate, was asterisk recognition. The crowd found its voice in stages. The Velori side reached it first, not with noise but with a sound William had no existing category for, a low harmonic resonance that began in the front rows and moved backward and upward through the stone seats like something traveling through the mountain itself. He felt it in his sternum before he heard it properly. The drone, at the perimeter, emitted a brief burst of static that might have been malfunction or might have been, in some technical sense, surprise. The human side was louder and less coordinated, which was on brand. There was applause that started in several places simultaneously and didn't quite synchronize, and someone in the upper tier made a sound that was either a cheer or a sob and was probably both. Carter, William knew without looking, was almost certainly holding his tablet with both hands and doing nothing with it. Then came the things that no protocol had anticipated. A Velori elder in the third row, ancient, silver-haired, her long ears folded slightly forward in an expression William had learned meant deep feeling, pressed both hands flat against the stone of the seat before her and began to weep. Not quietly, with the full and unself-conscious openness of someone for whom emotion was not a private matter but a fact of the world, to be acknowledged as straightforwardly as weather or gravity. A junior human diplomat near William's delegation saw this, and sat down abruptly on the amphitheater steps, as though his legs had made a unilateral decision. In the upper tier, a human general, broad, decorated, the kind of figure whose presence at a negotiation was meant to signal readiness rather than hope, reached up and removed his ceremonial insignia from his jacket. He did not throw it. He did not make a speech. He simply set it on the stone beside him with the deliberate quiet of a man returning something to a place it no longer needed to be, and then folded his hands in his lap and looked at the floor of the central circle where William and Isabella still stood, and his expression was the expression of someone doing arithmetic they had not expected to come out the way it had. Isabella turned, eventually, and looked at the crowd, both sides of it, with the same measured attention she gave everything, as though cataloging the responses, filing them somewhere precise and internal. Then she looked back at William. "The drone," she said, "has been attempting to translate what just occurred for the past several minutes." William glanced at the drone, which was cycling through a sequence of indicator lights in a pattern he had never seen before. "What's it saying?" he asked. "Nothing coherent," she said. It appears to be offering everyone soup." He laughed, a real one, the involuntary kind, the kind that arrives before the part of your brain responsible for diplomatic comportment can intervene. And the amphitheater carried it upward through 17,000 seats and gave it back to him from the mountain, which was the strangest and most accurate thing that ancient and patient place had ever done. Isabella watched his laughter with the careful, precise attention she gave everything. She did not look away. And in the long moment after the laughter had settled, and the crowd was still finding its register, and the drone was still, apparently, offering soup, in that specific and unrepeatable moment, neither of them looked like an enemy. Peace, it turned out, smelled like paperwork. Not immediately. Immediately it smelled like the amphitheater stone warming in the late Sarath sun, and the particular atmospheric quality of 17,000 people exhaling at the same time. But within 2 hours the frameworks had been produced, and the frameworks required annexes, and the annexes required authentication. And authentication required the kind of administrative infrastructure that arrived on Sarath within the day aboard 3 separate vessels, as though it had been waiting in orbit for a signal, which, William supposed, it probably had. Somewhere in the upper levels of the human diplomatic corps, someone had been practical enough to prepare for success while publicly preparing for failure. He found he could not be annoyed by this. It was, in its way, the most human thing he had encountered all week. He signed 17 documents before noon. Carter stood beside him and handed him each one with the reverent precision of a surgical assistant, having apparently decided that the occasion demanded a new register of seriousness, which lasted until he handed William the wrong document twice in a row, and had to shuffle through the stack with increasing urgency, while William waited with the patience of a man who had once sat through a 43-minute argument about the philosophical violence of agendas. The Valori signed their corresponding documents in a separate chamber, which was protocol, and their signatures were not signatures at all but harmonic impressions, a frequency unique to each individual, recorded and crystallized into the document medium by a device that looked like a tuning fork designed by someone who thought tuning forks lacked ambition. William had learned this from his briefing file. He had not, at the time, imagined he would find himself moved by it. He found himself moved by it. The gathered thousands did not disperse immediately. They remained on the slopes of Sarath through the afternoon, shifting gradually from witness to participant in the way crowds do when an event becomes a memory in real time. People finding each other across the old divisions, speaking in the careful, exploratory way of those testing new ground for stability. A Valori journalist approached a human counterpart near the eastern entrance and asked a question, and the human answered, and the Valori tilted her long ears forward in the expression William now knew meant deep attention. And the human, apparently understanding something about that gesture without having been told, spoke more slowly and with greater care. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. The drone located William at the overlook above the amphitheater as the light began to change, which was where he had gone without deciding to go there, and announced that it had completed a full diagnostic of its translation functions, following what it described as the unprecedented communicative event of this morning, and found all 42 dialects operating within normal parameters. "Good," said William. "I have also," said the drone, "resolved the refreshment malfunction." "You had a refreshment malfunction." "I have been offering soup," the drone said, with something that resided in the general vicinity of dignity, when the contextually appropriate offering was tea. "I regret the error." William looked at it for a moment. "I'll take the tea," he said. "I know," said the drone, and produced it. He was still standing there when he heard her footsteps on the stone behind him, unhurried, precise, the particular cadence he had catalogued without meaning to across weeks of mornings and evenings and sessions that had felt, at the time, like failure accumulating towards something. She stopped beside him at the railing and looked down at the amphitheater the way she always had, completely, without performance, giving it the same attention she gave everything that mattered to her. They stood in a silence that was entirely different from the silences they had shared before. Those had been silences of adjacency, two people occupying the same space with careful, maintained distance. This one had no distance in it. It was simply quiet, the way things are quiet after they have been resolved. "The frameworks are adequate," she said, eventually. "High praise," said William. "They will require revision in approximately 14 months," she said. "Several of the boundary clauses are imprecise. I'll put it in my calendar." She looked at him then, and something moved through her expression. Not the almost smile he had catalogued from the corner of his eye across weeks of evenings, but the full and direct version of it, arrived at last, worn with the same composure she wore everything. It lasted only a moment. It was enough. "You were 11 minutes late," she said, "to the negotiation that ended a war." "I was looking at the amphitheater," he said. "I know," she said. "I was watching." She turned and walked back toward the station, her silver hair lifting once in the wind that moved through the old stone, her long ears angled back toward him for just a moment in the way he had learned meant she was still listening. He watched her go. Below them the amphitheater held its 17,000 seats in the late light, patient and enormous, full now of something it had been empty of for a very long time. William drank his tea. It was, finally, the right thing. There is a moment, and perhaps you have lived it in your own way in your own life, when everything that was supposed to be impossible becomes, without warning or ceremony, simply what happened. Not extraordinary, not miraculous, just real and done, and sitting quietly in the past tense where no one can take it back. William did not end a war because he was brave. He did not end it because he was brilliant, or because the right words finally arrived, or because someone in a room above him made the correct strategic calculation. He ended it because he was willing to be uncertain in front of someone who was watching, and because he reached out his hand when pride, every institutional, historical, deeply reasonable kind of pride, told him not to, and because she met him there. That is the part worth sitting with. We build our distances carefully, don't we? We have very good reasons for them. We have documents of 41 pages and old wounds that have been annotated for clarity, and the entirely rational understanding that extending yourself towards something unfamiliar is a risk that history does not always reward. We are very practiced at the architecture of not reaching. We have refined it across generations and called it many things: strategy, dignity, principle, self-preservation. And sometimes it is those things. But sometimes it is simply fear wearing the clothes of wisdom. And the only way to know the difference is to stand at the center of the amphitheater with the wind in your ears and ask yourself what you are actually protecting. Isabella asked nothing of William that she was not willing to do herself. She walked down from the high platform. She crossed the floor. She spoke first. There is something in that, in the willingness to go first, to say the true thing before you know how it will be received. That has nothing to do with science fiction, and everything to do with the conversation you have been avoiding, the distance you have been maintaining, the person across whatever table you are sitting at right now who is also, in their own way, waiting. Wars are made by pride. Perhaps peace really does require something pride can never offer. What would you reach for if you stopped waiting for the other side to move first? What distance are you keeping that you have named something other than fear? And who is standing at the center of your amphitheater, wondering if you will come down from the platform? Think about it. Sit with it. Let it be uncomfortable for a moment, because the uncomfortable questions are usually the ones that matter. We've reached the end of another adventure, friends. Please show your appreciation by liking the story, leaving your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribing to Sci-Fi Traveler so you don't miss our next story. See you in the next story. Take care, friends.